Welcome to episode number 3 of the Basketball Skills Podcast. Today I'm here with Coach Dan Ourian. We first met when he was the director for the 92nd Street Y Maccabi delegation, which was a while back. That was, I think, 12 years ago, maybe more.
Around that, yeah, around
Yeah,
that.
around then. Around then. Since he's moved out to San Francisco with his wife and 2 kids, and he's working as the assistant director of the Applied Sport and Performance Psychology graduate program, Dominican University, which
Right.
I think makes you the perfect candidate for this conversation. We focus a lot on the mental side of performance, which I think is a huge gap in the skill development arena at the moment, especially for young players. And Coach Dan has over 2 decades of experience as a coach, developing other coaches as well, and a mental performance consultant. He earned his master's degree in sports psychology from John F. Kennedy University, where he completed research on emotional regulation among high school basketball coaches. I'm sure there was a compelling data set there. We could probably, talk about that in depth. And you also created a mental skills training curriculum for basketball players and coaches entitled Hoops Minded. Since moving to the Bay Area, you've started a mental performance private practice called Hoops Minded and earned your certified mental performance consultant credential from the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. Over your 2 decades of experience, you've worked with hundreds of basketball players and other athletes as well, supporting their on-court performance, specifically their mental game. So I'm really excited about this conversation. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
No, Coach Ravitz, I'm so excited and it's great to see you in this capacity. And I'm not gonna go too deep into, seeing you as a young buck and seeing you today, but that's all true. And so it's very cool for me to have a full circle moment like this. So I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, of course, it's been a while since we caught up, so it'll be nice to have a
Mhm.
little catch up slash, share some wisdom, I think, for our listeners. And I think the best place to start is talk to me about your mental skills training curriculum. It seems like it's something that is talked about a lot, but it's not always necessarily systematized and structured.
Right.
It's something that I'm working to create with my program, and it seems like it's something that you've seen success with. So walk me through what your curriculum is, what it looks like, and also how you designed it, how you were able to structure it.
Yeah, so, the background is I came up playing basketball, and then when playing only allowed me to go, but so far I got into coaching basketball at our alma mater. I was able to manage for a drop of time and then studied abroad. And when I studied abroad, I really had my first intro into coaching, and I knew I was hooked ever since. So I came at this field of sports psychology from a coaching basketball lens, and a lot of my work was on court coaching, either for a team or, spend years doing one-on-one training. And, now I like to joke that you could throw a basketball in any direction and you're going to hit a skills training session because it's become so ubiquitous. But for me in my sports psych training, it was really how do I merge the two and how do I make it so that we can teach mental performance within the fabric of on-court training? Because I think what happened is you would notice basketball players, they'll often like puff up their chest and say like, I'm good. I don't need any of that sort of off court work with a psychologist bit. And for me, I was saying, well, this is an important part of the game. We know it's a huge part of the game. What are we doing to train it? We don't have to go over there. It doesn't have to be removed from it. And so, my curriculum is really a 12-week program. It's meant for groups or it could be for a team. And it's taking a variety of mental skills and then teaching them on court and having drills that can incorporate those mental skills throughout. So, starting with some education of the topic, going into straight basketball training drills, but incorporating that theme throughout, right? So that, is a 12-week program with a ton of information in it. And that's used again for small groups or for teams. That to me is a direction we can go where you're not removing one from the other. If we're going to need these mental skills when we play, why aren't we teaching them, drilling them in the context of playing? And so that's the hope for that. And I think basketball in general, I think is coming a long way towards mental performance. Obviously, you have the pros like Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan and such who've talked a lot about mental health. And I like to share that it's, that direction is a piece of the whole mental performance is another way you get there, essentially, like how can your mind help you when you need it most? And so the curriculum is a way to touch on a variety of those topics within the fabric of on-court training.
Nice. That's awesome. I love that. Can you walk us through one, I don't know if you develop modules or specific topics within the training. Just walk us through, what would be like week one of your curriculum.
Yeah, so we start with an introduction to mental performance and what it is, and really an assessment of where you are. So we're going to assess basketball skills, but we're also going to assess where you see yourself in mental skills. So one of the things we use is what's called a performance profile. And that's essentially a fancy way to say a self-assessment in mental skills. So you're going to select from a list of 12 mental skills, which are most important to you in your game. And then you're going to assess where you're at, in that particular skill from 0 to 10. And that's going to give us sort of a roadmap of what's important to you. And if we're doing this with a team, it would be, from the team perspective, these are skills we find as important to a team. And then where do you as a team see yourself? So, what do we mean? What are the mental skills? What are we talking about? I mean, it's stuff that you already know.
Mhm.
It's things like motivation, focus and concentration, emotional regulation, energy management. So, knowing whether I need to energize or I need to relax, and then knowing how to do one or the other to get to that ideal level of energy. A huge one, obviously, is confidence. And then ways we get there, include breath work, include focus cues or cue phrases, having a reset routine when things go awry. And then a huge one, obviously, is imagery, or as it's commonly known, visualization. Um, so there are a variety of skills and then a variety of ways we get there. I think a simple way to think about it is like, having a shooting cue, right? And I know you're really focused on the psychology of shooting. So,
Mhm.
what is your cue when you're shooting, right? For some, it might be legs, right? For some, it might be back rim. For some, it might be middle finger, right? Having that audible cue that kind of gets you away from having to think about the situation and into the one either mechanical element or target related element you want to focus on. So, every time we shoot in this shooting exercise, you're going to have identified your shooting cue word or phrase, and you're going to audibly say that aloud every single time. So every time I come up, legs, every time I come up, legs, 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 right? And repeating that over and over so that it becomes well grooved as like, okay, I missed a couple. I got to remind myself, put more legs into it, as an example. So the audible cues, would be one of the ways we do that, one of the modules in the 12-week program.
Nice. That's funny you say that. As I'm listening to you, I'm obviously trying to put myself in your program and think about as a shooter, is that something I've done before, or is that something that I've taught maybe without even realizing? And I think for me, as a shooter, until you said this, I never thought about it critically. But for me, legs was always the cue because
Mm.
I had a tendency to get a little bit lazy with my catch. So doing all the work early, making sure I'm initiating the shot with my legs, and that would translate, to better arc. Um,
Mhm.
but that's interesting. It reminds me, like golf is always an analogy, especially when it comes to this, the mental performance side. And I'm a big golfer. I don't know if you play yourself. Um, but
Not
that
a golfer. No, I won't play golf till the wheels fall off, Gabe.
okay.
That's
Fair
just
enough,
me.
fair
That's
enough.
just me.
I'm not playing as much basketball these days, so coaching basketball, playing golf. But they always say, you should have it's like a swing thought, right? Instead of thinking this is what I need to do at every stage throughout the swing, with basketball, it's happening so fast. When you
Right.
catch the ball, if you say, okay, bend my knees, keep my elbow in, bring the ball straight, there's no
It's too
way.
much.
Yeah, it's too much.
Right.
So that's it's and how did you determine the auditory cue, or I guess, the verbal cue? How did you move from just saying, okay, in your head, just think legs, and then actually making the shift from, okay, you're thinking it, and now you're speaking it into existence, because I think that falls into the imagery and visualization category as well. And then, actually translating that into your physical action of your jump shot.
Well, I think, the audible piece is one part. You can also have a visual cue like, back of the rim. So back of the rim is what I'm saying. Obviously, that's kind of where I'm looking. Um, And so that, and then two, it might just be more motivational than it is instructional or mechanical, right? So it might be like, you got this, you got this, you got this, sort of. I don't need, my mechanics are just fine, right? And I know I'm looking at whatever part of the rim, but I need that confidence piece. So I'm going to give myself some motivational talk, right? So I think, there's different elements to it, but when it comes to the shooting itself, I think an audible cue, a visual cue, and then also like, is there a physical cue? So is there a particular way you were saying like I had to do my shot prep early? Like, is there a physical cue that I just know ball's coming to me, I drop, I get low into my stance, I throw my right leg back or something of that nature? That's what I need to focus on. So I think all of these things you're kind of vetting them from the individual perspective and say like, what is most helpful to you and what is most of need. But definitely cues are a big part of it, whether they be visual or audible or physical.
Mhm. Yeah, almost like a trigger. Like that's a common
Right.
it's a common debate in basketball, the dip, right? When you catch the
Right.
ball, you bring it down or you not bring it down. And I've
Right.
advocated for it. I think the dip is great because um I'm I'm on I'm on the warpath against this idea of a quick release. Like I think
Uh-huh.
I think it's totally misguided because if you're trying to get yourself to shoot it faster, your percentage is going to go down. And
Hmm.
if if that's really the difference between you getting the shot off or not, it's probably not a good shot anyway, unless
Right.
unless there's like the end of the shot clock, or you have to shoot it for some reason. Um,
Right.
and I think the quick release that comes from the prep work, that comes from getting your feet set quickly, and then actually shooting the ball. So I think the dip of like the 0.1 seconds that it takes you to dip the ball, if that can increase your percentage by 5%, then do it every time. That was my
Yeah. Yeah.
I caught
Yeah.
it. If I caught it here, if I caught it here, wherever, I'm always dipping it into my shooting pocket so that I can kind of like trigger that shot in the same way.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're an open shooter, you're going to still be open after you dip it, right? If you're not open and you're reading space, well, you can probably dip it either way. It's not going to add that much time, but like you said, it probably will assist your percentages.
Yeah, yeah. Can you Uh, if you're comfortable, you don't have to use names. Can you share any stories of, things that players you've worked with have been dealing with? Something that might, resonate for people listening that are going through mental struggles, how you help them overcome, whatever they were dealing with, and what those issues were.
Yeah, I mean it's been a lot of players over a good amount of time, and what's been cool is seeing some players in particular who have taken to the work um, have started from a position of fear of failure.
Mm,
I notice that a lot. Fear of other people's opinions. And sort of the player who's constantly looking over his shoulder at coach on one side, or looking over at parent
mm,
on the other side, and sort of constantly looking for that validation from external sources. And that's just how they've been wired from a young age. And so, a couple in particular who had that sort of pronounced fear of failure, fear of other people's opinions, would practice one way and play another way. And in practice, knockdown shooter. In games, reluctant shooter.
Mm.
And so, how do you go from being that capable to not even pulling the trigger at all? Well, you don't have the confidence in yourself. And so, a lot of that work is sort of uncovering where that comes from, like going back to your origin of how you were with competition and when that started. And did you care so much about competition that your identity got wrapped into your performance? And what I found for so many, and I'm sure, Coach, you were in this bucket. I know for me, I was in this bucket. I started competing before I was able to really truly understand winning and losing. And I was put in front of a crowd, refs, scoreboards, and that environment before I could withstand not having success in that environment and loving the game so much so to the point of obsession led me to performing better in practice than I would in games and not wanting to take risk in games because if I failed, my self-worth took a hit. And so what I've tried to do with, this couple of players in particular is first helping them recognize that you are not your sport, that you're a human being who chooses to play their sport, and that you're free to fail on a basketball court. That you're not defined by the results. That if you go 0 for 7, there's not a tiger in a cage that's going to be let out of the cage and be sent across the court to go eat you and kill you. That you're safe and truly safe, like
Mm.
physically, psychologically safe by whatever happens on a basketball court. You're safe. And I think that's, something that takes some time to kind of sit with, kind of meditate on, and allow it to sink into where you can come to the court free and know that whatever happens, I'm free to fail here. I'm going to give my blood, sweat, and tears to this, and I'm safe.
Mm.
I'm literally safe. And I think that takes time. So, I lead players through meditation. I definitely, assign them with some reflection. And over time, again, this player in particular I was talking about, we look at three things like one, your self-assessment. Are you seeing a change yourself and how you would score yourself? Two, are you using the language of mental skills? But three, is your performance changing? Like, are you playing differently? And over time, in all three areas, we notice this shift where it was more of like an effort mentality. It's
Mhm.
like, I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna trust my skills.
Mhm.
And so it's not magic. I like to say I think it's a Steve Clifford or Tom Thibodeau quote, the magic is in the work, right? You have to work on this stuff just like you do your jump shot,
Mhm.
just like you work, on your physical, on your body. But when you do put that work in, and I've had like 30 sessions with this individual now, then you start to see a shift and you start to see confidence separated from results, not the sort of roller coaster of like, oh, I'm 0 for 3, like I don't have it today. I lost my confidence, right? I lost my confidence. I don't know where it went, but I lost my confidence, right? Or where you had it, you packed it, right? You had it in your back. All right, so it's got to be here somewhere, right? And I could go on, but to answer your question, I start with unpacking identity,
Mhm.
and helping players recognize that they are free to play this game free.
So it's almost reframing their self evaluation as like an intrinsic sense of, this is what I do, it's not who I am, and
Right.
allowing to kind of free themselves to perform without any what I would call like outsized repercussions.
It's a good way of putting it. Yeah, we have what is called, an over-invested athletic identity a lot of times. So, you know, I think it's rewiring. It's trying to change the wiring, which oftentimes has been completely set. And we're trying to change it and suggest that, yeah, this is not something where you need to feel unsafe. This is a place where if you've done the prep work, you can now go and do the trust work, right? So it's like trying and trusting. I try everything in practice, but I have to have a mechanism to trust everything in a performance, right? My mindset for one does not have to follow as a mindset for the other. It should shift because the performance requires different things than the preparation does.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's a balance because I think for me as a player, and I'm sure you felt this growing up, if you're a basketball player, like you are a basketball player. Like that is
Right.
your identity. If you're obsessed, I was obsessed. So I'm in the gym 2, 3, even 4 times a day sometimes.
Mm,
It's all I do, all I think about. I'm in class watching highlights on YouTube. Like, it's very all encompassing. And so when in high school, it's 8-minute quarters. You have 32 minutes to give your best effort. And sometimes the ball doesn't go in the basket for those 32 minutes. And it feels like I am a basketball player and
mhm.
I'm not living up to my identity. And it kind of
Right.
these um, these feelings of ambivalence towards the game sometimes. I'm not seeing the results. Do I do I keep going to the gym? It becomes this place of frustration rather than
Right.
a safe haven, which is why do
Hmm.
I actually do this? I do this because I love basketball, and there's nothing I would rather be doing, right? And it's almost like creating the opposite effect because you buy in so much that you're you're overweighting the consequences of the reality, which the reality is next week you'll have another game.
Right.
Whatever happened the week before, it doesn't matter anymore. But at the same time, when you're not that invested, it can be hard to see big strides because you're not putting that emotional investment also into the game. How is that something
Right.
that you balance? Is there a way to hit the right balance? Do you
Yeah.
I mean, certainly you think it's something that can be learned. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, how do you go about
I
that?
Well, I think, it's easier to say whoa than giddy up, right? So in terms of motivation, like it's easier to, slow someone down who's obsessed,
Mhm,
and help them think about recovery and being thoughtful about workouts, right? And recognizing their identity is not baked into their performance. It's easier to pull someone back than it is to push someone towards, right? If you don't have that love of the sport, it's going to be hard to give you love of the sport.
mhm,
I think you and I and many others, they found the game, fell in love with the game, and you had to pry them away from the screen, pry them away from shooting a basketball. And you would rather that than sort of like, oh, go shoot, go work out. Like telling someone to go do a thing is probably not going to be as easy as, again, pulling them back from
mhm,
their love. If you can help show them how this is in service of their performance, then you're better off. Like this idea of over-invested athletic identity is primarily to support someone's well-being, which is super important. It's super important because period, well-being is important. And it's super important because well-being is a foundation to performing your best. If you're not well, you're not going to perform your best.
mhm,
And this is also a performance hack. I don't want to say the word hack. I hate saying the word hack, but it's, a performance concept because really, when you start to recognize you are not your sport, you're free to fail, you're safe, then you can go and take risks. You're going to shoot every open shot. You're not going to stall out the offense. You're not going to glitch,
mhm,
right? You're going to shoot every shot regardless because you're free and you read the situation. You're not playing between your ears. You're playing the situation in front of you. And that's when you can start to play with more freedom. And that's how we know. We know that we play our best when, oh, I wasn't thinking, I was just reacting,
mhm,
right? I wasn't in my head. So many times players, yeah, I'm just in my head a lot, right? Well, first of all, that's the only place you could be. There's no leaving your head. Sorry. Sorry, everyone. There's nowhere else to go, right? But what we mean when we say we're in our head a lot is like the self-talk is constantly firing. And there's too much of that going on to allow us to just react. Our ability to process information is harmed by all of that extra information we're working with.
Mm.
So it's really a valuable place to go to. I think what it comes down to is perspective. It gives you perspective. And you and I were talking earlier about like your perspective shifted at a certain point in your playing career, and that was what you needed.
Hmm.
And this is partially, I work with a lot of high school athletes. Partially, I'm trying to help them shift their perspective sooner so that they could see there's another way of seeing it for their benefit. And, it's hard because when you're in it, you just want it all right now, today, this
Hmm.
moment. And this is the kind of work that takes some time. You got to sit with it. There's work to be done between sessions. Um, but if you do that and you're really committed to it, that's when it's proactive mental skills training. So, that player I mentioned, and we just hit the 30 session mark. It's no longer reactive to like, I'm afraid, I'm looking over my shoulder.
Hmm.
He has, really blossomed into like shooter. I'm going to shoot. If I'm open, I'm going to shoot. He knows I'm open, I'm shooting it. I don't care. Right. Within, you
Right.
know, some, sense of like we're playing organized basketball here, obviously. Um, but now it's not reactive to a problem, it's proactive mental skills training, which I always like to say to people, it's like mental skills training is like one third of the stool, right? There's three legs of a stool. It's your skills training with Coach Ravitz. It's your getting with your strength trainer, it's getting in the weight room, strength
Hmm.
and conditioning, and it's mental performance work. And they're all really valuable.
Hmm. Yeah, 100%. I think the skills training and the mental training are also very intertwined. Like that's one thing that
Right.
I try to create. So part of what I do is I develop training curriculums for players where, we don't have to be on the court together for you to be getting better. I work
Right.
with, countless skills trainers and the person that I worked out with for the longest time, Ross Burns, he's incredible. I don't know if you know him, but NBA
Hmm.
trainer, he's like the skills guy. And every I think we got a little there we go. I think we got a little internet. And every session we had, right? It's amazing. I'm learning a lot. Um, and I'm developing these habits and learning how to, read the game, things like that. But then I leave and I have to go do it on my own. Right? Nobody
Right.
sees a skills trainer 6 times a week. It's not
Right.
realistic. It's not financially viable. Um, and it's also, you have to be able to design the workouts on your own time to actually replicate the game. So something that, I try to do is, okay, we're giving ourselves confidence in these workouts because we're
Right.
shooting all the same shots that we see in the game. There's a lot of kids go into the gym and they say, all right, I'm gonna shoot 100 shots, 10 shots around from each spot, and I'm gonna go back. And when does that ever happen in a game?
Right.
That to me is, when I was a player, when I, got older and understood, how to properly structure a workout, I do that when I'm warming up to get
Right.
into the other stuff, or I do that if I'm, for whatever reason, feeling like something mechanically is off and I just need to shoot and just get it out of my system. Like
Hmm.
that's what I would do. Or if I had a bad shooting day the game before, I'm like, I just need to see the ball go in the basket. And that,
Yeah.
mentally, the impact that would have for me. And I think there's a lot of crossover there between the skills and the mental. And there's a lot of mental that happens off the court, but also on the court. For example, one thing, you mentioned reframing, like you don't understand what winning and losing really is when you're so young.
Hmm.
Kind of
Hmm.
reframing those binary outcomes. For me, when I, was at the end of my college career playing professionally, it was almost like I didn't watch the ball after it left my hand. Right. So in my mind, if I when that ball leaves my hand, I know I have no control over it anymore.
Hmm.
I've done all the things that I need to do. And if the mechanics are great and it came off well, in my head, that's a make,
Right.
right? So you have to be almost like tricking your mind, at least in my opinion. Maybe you feel differently and you can feel free to argue with me. But I don't think about shooting in terms of makes and misses because whatever, however good of a shooter you are, you're gonna be at a certain average. And so I'd say to myself, all right, if I just missed 8 shots in a row, I got to make the next five because, that's
Right.
the percentage that I'm supposed to be at. And if I just made 8 shots in a row, then I'd take the other side and I'd say, oh, I'm hot. Next one's going in, and it's always
Hmm.
just kind of
Hmm.
figuring out how to convince yourself the next shot's going in. And that's something that you can do, I think, with skills training in terms of, um, a rhythm shooting drill that I have a lot of my players do: shoot till you miss two in a row at each spot. And so it's okay.
Hmm.
I've just missed. Now I got to lock back in, make the next one, and recovering from
Yeah.
it, or making a certain number of shots in a row where it's great that you've made 7 or 8, but 9 and 10, those are the ones that actually translate to the game. You
Hmm. Hmm.
know,
No, I think you're speaking to like a process focus. It's sort of like, what does a good shot feel like? Right. And you have to really know that. And so if I took 8 shots and I missed them, but each one felt good, I could feel great about that ninth shot, right? Conversely, like you might get something off, but it was, off balance and I barely saw the rim and I made it. Does that make it a good shot that we want to repeat? No, probably not. So, we've heard trust the process and there's so much good reason to do that. But then also back to what your point was about sort of like, what shots am I getting in a game? I think there's a big direction in coaching towards, representative learning. Like, how do you make practices or trainings look like the game? And it's not 10 shots for 5 spots, right? Because when am I ever doing that? It's more, a shot here and then a sprint there and several D slides and I'm out of breath and I get whacked. And then now it's another shot from somewhere totally different. And these situations constantly changing. And I think that's really important. I think, you're speaking to also this idea of like get good versus feel good. It's like there's a moment, and if you're with younger athletes, there's good reason to have feel good reps. Feel good reps maybe like, I'm in the mid range and, we're not going to introduce a defender or any variables.
Mhm.
I just want you to shoot 10 mid range jumpers. It's the start of a workout, it's a warm up. You should feel good. And you're a young player, you need to build confidence in this way. Maybe if you're in a slump, you need to build that back. But are they get good reps, right? As opposed to feel good reps? Get good reps may not feel good. They may be messy. You may not make as much, but you're probably turning a corner on your actual ability, right? So I think you might create workouts where there's an element of feel good reps, but then the real work is in the get good reps. And I always say when I'm working with coaches is like be comfortable making it messy. The game is messy. Like as coaches, we like a nice drill
Mhm.
that's nice and orderly and things are organized and a player has good chance for success. It makes us feel good. And like we're in control. But are our players getting better? Or can I get comfortable in a messy environment and allowing that to take shape? Because a lot of times that's where the growth really happens.
Mhm. Yeah. And I love that point about like creating the mess. Coach Mantegna, who coaches at Blair Academy, that's where I went. I referenced them a couple of times on the podcast, but anyone who's listening who doesn't know, look him up, perennial prep basketball powerhouse. He talks about creating chaos in practices. And that's something
Hmm.
that is very effective because the entire game is chaotic. It's always chaotic.
Right,
One thing that
right.
I try um, to give to my players, to teach to my players when I'm, structuring these workouts or for, clients I'm working with in person, um, they get frustrated sometimes because they're shooting below what they feel like their normal, practice percentages are. And I have to, stop the workout and say, this, we're not trying to attain a practice percentage here. That's not what we're doing. We're not trying to say, okay, you're shooting, on those 10 catch and shoot shots at each spot, you're shooting 60%. We're trying to get you to 75. That's not what we're doing. What we're trying to do is bridge the gap between your game percentage and your practice percentage. So if you're shooting 40% in games, from the field and 60% in workouts, I would rather you shoot 55% in practice and 45% in games rather than go to
Right.
75% in practice, but still be shooting 40% in games.
Right.
And it seems obvious, but I think a lot of players and a lot of coaches, to your point, don't realize that it's actually about building for the game. It's not about improving our practice percentages because that
Right.
doesn't correlate necessarily to the game.
Right. And it's again, it's player specific. It's going to depend on the context and the age. So that's going to determine what their needs are. You're going to have a portion of it where you might be building up their confidence, and they need that, those feel good reps, but that doesn't necessarily translate in the same way. So, I think as you advance in the game, you're more comfortable understanding that and getting uncomfortable in your workouts. I think that's where the real growth happens.
Mhm. And how do you structure um, your coaching of coaches? Talk to me a little bit about that because we've referenced a couple of times now, like the get good reps versus feel good reps, how
Yeah.
to kind of go through a workout a little bit. And I think that's a big piece too, that there's a lot of coaches that unfortunately aren't always giving the right tools, and they mean well, they want the best for their players, but they don't have someone like you who's, helping to make sure that they're doing things the right way.
Yeah. So, one is on a larger scale, at Dominican University, we do these coaches webinars, and those are open free webinars that are out for coaches and different topics. I have a very big mindfulness-based background, and we've done one on that. We've done one on creating a motivational climate as a coach, and always with the precursor that coaches are performers in their own right, right? And for coaches to be at their best to serve others, they need to recognize that they are a performer. They need to care for themselves, and they need to think through their own mental skills as it pertains to their performance. I think in terms of the individual coach relationship, there's a couple of teams I work here with in the Bay Area and do sessions for their high school team. But in addition, it's working with their coach. So it's kind of regular chats, it's regular conversations, it's meetings. You know, with one in particular, it's less about practice design. He's got it pretty dialed in. It's more about, I hate to say like emotional support, but having been a high school varsity coach myself, I know it could be a very lonely endeavor. And for him, it's like, he's treating it like a college program, and he's watching film and he's going to scout, and he's done an amazing job. It's a successful program, but it's often like it's just him out there, and having another person to speak to about like, oh man, how did we go down by we were up 7, how did we go down and how did we lose that game, and sort of talking it through, not just to like process it as if therapy, but to have, someone to kind of bat ideas around with, who's been there, but also like can help you see the mental side of the sport. That's sort of where that work has gone. And that's been really cool because again, I've been on that side where, I was a coach and it can feel lonely at times. And then now helping coaches sort of like organize their thinking and helping them process, the highs and lows of coaching. That's what that's been about, and it's been really cool. I think we've seen a shift, and there are coaches for coaches now, and I think the best leaders recognize that they want leaders too, and they want coaching too, and so that's been a really nice direction we're seeing coaches go.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think especially at the high school level, it is lonely because
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
you're a college head coach, you have an entire staff behind you. You're
right,
you're not the only one putting in long hours. You have your
right.
coaches to bounce ideas off of. At the high school level, that doesn't really exist. You have parents wanting to talk to you about their kids' playing time. You've got 12 sets of personalities and
Right.
trajectories and commitments to the game and all of these different things that I'm sure it takes an emotional toll. And
Yeah. And even collegiate coaches, like you may have a staff of, let's say, five assistant coaches, give or take.
Mhm.
But we always talk about like the 12 inches over to the head coaching seat is very different. And so you can have a staff of assistant coaches, but doesn't necessarily mean like you can really ask them, given the power dynamics, for some of the, a different viewpoint. And as an outside observer, a coach's coach can give you an outside viewpoint and maybe a perspective shift that maybe when you're in it, you're in the weeds on a day-to-day basis with the coach, like you can't necessarily do. So yeah, I think there's good value in it. I think also coaches are recognizing the need to, care for themselves, put your oxygen mask on first. Like you can't pour from an empty cup, that kind of concept. And so I think we're seeing two things. One, some of the older coaches are transitioning out, the Jay Wrights, and others who have left maybe before they are of retirement age because the game is changing
Mhm.
and maybe they don't want to be a part of it. And you're also noticing a younger group of coaches that are taking on, a coach for coaches. So it's been a cool shift.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I think the more support we can provide for coaches as well, it's just
Yeah.
the better product that the players
Yeah.
get. And I think it's also from the player perspective, it's it's easy to say, "Oh, I have a great coach," but just because they're a great coach in a team environment doesn't necessarily mean they're putting you personally on the right track. And that's
Mhm.
another thing that I think when it comes to, coaching, players have to understand the coach's first priority is to win as many games as possible, win championships. Maybe if you're at a prep school environment, there is a college prep element to it. Um, but from the player perspective, how would you balance, um, committing to the coach, finding skills trainers and Instagram trainers and all this, all this stuff that we see now. Because I have a lot of parents that follow me and watch my content, and I think that's a question that they also are struggling with when they express to me, he has great coaches around him, and like, are we doing all the right things? Like that kind of.
Yeah, that's tough. There's a lot of inputs, right? There's
Mhm.
so many inputs, there's so much social media, there's a lot of information available, so it could sort of be overload, right? I think I would try to not have too many chefs in the kitchen with my own child. It's sort of like, can I find one or two voices that I think we really trust, and then having conversations with those coaches outside of just X's and O's,
Hmm.
but more so, is there any coaching philosophy that you adhere to? And, I think speaking with other parents that have been coached by that coach may be valuable, but it's a lot to sift through. I can't say I have any one really good answer on that. I just think there's a lot of voices out there, a lot of inputs. I would want to try to make sure that the child really loves the game and then limit how many voices they're getting because I think that can get to be a little too much. As it is, they're going to be on Instagram and see like this move and that, and he has that bag, and like, it could be so much that it's like, are you really helping them or is it too much, right? So I think it takes a rare kid to like be able to weed that out and maybe the family context to weed that out and like stay locked in on a strong direction.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's good advice because too many voices, there's no consistent track, right? If you're doing it
Right. And
for
then there's
6 months,
also like,
it's you're
jumping around from coach to coach, from program to program. It's not going good. We were there for 2 weeks and he didn't play, so we're jumping ship and the AAU world of like, I'm playing with my third team of the weekend, like it's just I don't know what it teaches our players. I don't want to be like, in my day kind of old man talk, but I do think there's a little bit to be said for like staying with it, even
Mhm.
if it's not going great right away.
Yeah, and I think there's a pretty clear transition into college basketball. We don't have to go down the the NIL rabbit hole, but
No, please no.
yeah, I think there's a a lot of I personally have mixed feelings about it, but conversation for another day.
Mhm.
You in terms of picking a path, I think what is undervalued as from the parental perspective is how much time do you really have? Like that's
Mhm.
something that I'm now realizing, like for me as a player, the stuff that I knew, as a senior in college, the stuff that I learned basically from, figuring it out on my own and
Yeah,
failing a lot of times and putting myself in bad positions when it comes to playing time and other things. Um, Suddenly, your 4-year college career is in its last year, right? And
right,
even if you're the parent of a 14-year-old, if your 14-year-old has the goal of getting to a Division I program, they are 2 years away from recruitment, right? And that time goes by fast. So I think
right,
um, there's a balance of, okay, they're a kid, they need to have fun, they need to enjoy the game and appreciate the game. Um, but also, okay, if this is something that you really do want to do, how do we prepare you to get to the next level? Because the truth is you don't have a lot of time, right? Like if
right.
by 18 years old, you graduate high school and you haven't committed to a college program, that's probably the end of your organized basketball career.
Mhm. I would point it back to you,
Mm.
Gabe, because I think you in particular, um, you made a choice. Like I don't know what kind of offers you had or what, but I know some of your contemporaries, like maybe there was a interest in going D1 or bust. And you took a different route and you ended up, having an incredible college career, at least, at the ending, a really incredible senior year and it worked out. It really did. Um, and I think there's really good value in suggesting like what would be the best fit, not just like what is the shiny object or, the name recognition, but like what will be a great fit for me where I'm at, where I can go contribute, where this is a supportive environment. And, I would say you're a great example of someone who chose a good fit and it worked out for her. I was really happy to see that.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Maybe some self-interest there, being a fellow Cardinal,
Let's go.
being
Let's
gonna
go.
love you. But no, I think I don't regret my decision at all. Like I think I made the perfect decision for me. Going from a place like Blair Academy where in my 2 years there, I think I played with 10 high major guys. And my senior year, I was a team captain. I started every game. So I'm, in that realm of playing against future one and done guys, playing against
Right.
these high major players. So to me, I felt like I should have been, probably not high major because of my athletic limitations. But to me, my junior summer, I remember the summer between my junior and senior year, I didn't respond to any Division III coaches that texted me.
Hmm.
I didn't even
Hmm.
text them back because I was like, this is pointless. I'm a Division I player. I'm gonna play Division I.
Hmm.
And I had some ankle injuries that just kept recurring and recurring. And I remember just having a sit down with my coach and Coach Mantegna, who I don't think there's another coach in the country that prepares his guys better, for the next level and has um, this what he calls radical transparency, right? Like I don't care if you want to hear this or not. This is what you have to
Hmm.
hear. And we had a sit
Hmm.
down, and he's like, "Look, maybe you're a good enough player to play at the mid-major level, to play, for an Ivy or Patriot League or something. Like, who knows what's going to happen with your ankle? Like, you've come back because it was, come back, sprain it again. I'm trying to play through it because that's how I am, and it's just not fully healing. And he's like, you should like these are incredible programs. They're high academic schools. For me, that was like a non-starter. Like high academic was, a requirement. And unfortunately, at the Division I,
Okay.
the high academic schools are also the high major schools. So that, that adds another layer. But he basically said, he's like, you need to be taking these visits, you need to be talking to these coaches because this is probably where you're going to end up, and this is where you should end up. And I said,
Hmm.
I'm going to do that, but I want to think about walk on route. He reached out to coaches, and the feedback I got was, you'd be an idiot to come play here, basically. Like, we're happy to have you if you want to come, but we're going to recruit over you every single year. And you have to be twice as good as the scholarship guy to get on the court because we're, investing money in him. And this is pre NIL. So
Right.
those guys
Right.
now, they could be getting $500,000 or $1 million a
Right.
year. Um, and so I felt like, all right, I want to go to a place where I'll have an opportunity to play right away. And I played right away
Hmm.
as a freshman. And I had, a meaningful, considerable role, through my 4 years. And eventually I was able to play professionally going from the
Right.
level. So it worked out. And I think having the opportunity to develop with in-game reps is really important also. um,
Mm-hmm.
Going the walk-on route just because you play for a Duke or an Alabama or Auburn or any of these other schools, that doesn't mean you're going to be a professional.
Right.
There are plenty of
Yeah.
Division three guys that went on and women also that went on and played professional levels all over the country, all over the world. And I just felt like that was the best path for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it worked out. So happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, I think to finish up, one thing that might be interesting is to do a little mock session here. I had an issue my senior year from the free throw line.
All
And I'm
right.
curious to know how you would approach this from the coaching perspective. Um, so my senior year, we talk about how I kind of had that big jump um, towards my senior year and like specifically the later half of the season. I
Mm.
was shooting in league play. I was shooting, I think it was 43% from three. I was leading the conference in 3-point shooting. I was making between 3 and 4 a game, and I was shooting 70% from the free throw line. And
Mm.
I don't know what I was not a high volume free throw shooter. So part of it was I don't shoot a lot of free throws. I don't necessarily practice a lot of free throws. But then it like started to get in my head of like, how am I not making free throws? I'm looking at the percentage. I'm shooting in practice. I make 100, 150 in a row, and like I don't miss. And then I get in the game, and in the clutch, I would make them. But
Mm.
overall, 70%, that's probably not what you want from your 40% 3-point shooting guy. So what would be your approach if I were a client of yours?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's not a one size fits all approach. I think it's really trying to understand Gabe Ravis and
Mhm.
what makes him tick. One thing that you said that was interesting is that you weren't practicing them a lot. So I think like first and foremost, like if there's a struggle in any one particular area, there's no short-circuiting the reps, right? Like confidence, there's no way to get around the reps. So I think if you're struggling, are you getting the extra reps in your free throws? But then two, I wonder if for you there was any shift in sort of like the evaluation of eyes, sort of like the crowd perspective as you go on in the season. Maybe there's more eyeballs on your game. Maybe you're starting to get more notoriety as you're approaching like, the 3-point record and like, oh, Gabe, like great game. And like you're starting to get more of that sort of like people are watching feeling. And what's interesting about the three ball in a game versus the free throw line is that one is open skill, meaning I'm moving, I'm playing, I'm running around. There's not a stop. I don't have to spend any time in my head. I just have to react to the environment. Whereas the free throw line, the evaluation of eyeballs on you, the information processing now happens with that as sort of overloading. It's like, you know, am I now expected to be a certain way? So that can flood my information processing. Then it's like, am I harmed by that? Am I in my head? So if I'm in my head, like, how do I work with that? Right? If I'm at the free throw line, like I'm going through my routine, but in my head, I'm like, oh, fuck, I'm at the free throw line again. This is not my best. Well, that's the information that we need, that whatever we're seeing externally, what's going on internally. And working with a client is often like, can you do metacognition? Can you think about your thinking process and remember what you were thinking in the moment? And if you were having those thoughts of those sorts of repetitive thoughts that suggested like, oh, it's a free throw line moment, I'm supposed to X. Well, there's a lot of information in that. And often say like expectations are the way that success pivots. Like when there's expectations on me, now that can bring pressure, right? So if I find that I'm having those, repetitive thoughts, then it's working with that in and of itself. And so, it's a long answer, but essentially, I come from a mindfulness-based approach, which suggests that thoughts and feelings, even if they're unwanted, are not harmful in and of themselves. It's our perception of them that's harmful. So if you're having the thought, oh, fuck, I'm at the free throw line again and I just missed my last two, I have to make this one. Well, you have to work with that thought. And that thought you can allow that to harm you, or you could recognize that's just a thought. That's just a feeling. Feelings aren't facts. Feelings pass and return to the task at hand. So a mindfulness-based approach is not changing or controlling that thought. It's noticing it and letting it go and coming back to the present moment. The present moment, I'm at the free throw line, something I've done a million times, and I know very well what to do. I have a free throw routine. I know the feel of the ball. I know how to shoot it. I've felt a good make a million times. And so not being harmed by those thoughts and feelings, but just letting them go and coming back to focusing on the task at hand. The one thing I'll leave you with is the word win, WIN. And WIN is an acronym that just stands for what's important now. And what's important now is I'm at the free throw line and, my routine. Not like, oh, fuck, misses free throw. Like, oh, shit, what are they going to say? Like, I know that person's in the crowd. All the thoughts that kind of go through our heads. It's really just what is my routine? What does the ball feel like in my hands? Where's my focus cue, right? Where am I looking at the rim? And I don't even have to go through all of that. But if I find that my mind is on these other things, how do I bring it back to the task? And the task is where we can impact the game, right? Those what if moments, they're not real. And so coming back to impact, coming back to what's important now or when,
Mm.
that would be where I want to get you to, but it takes time.
Yeah,
It
well,
takes
I mean,
time.
we had had this conversation a couple of years ago. I maybe could have made a couple more free throws. I
Where were you, bro? Where were you?
don't
No,
know.
you did very well, man. You figured it out. You
Thank you.
figured it out.
No, that's great, and I'm sure, free throws are something that come up a lot. So hopefully, some listeners, at least one maybe can take some good advice from our
Hope
mom.
so.
But that's awesome. Thank you again for coming on. The mental performance is something that I really believe in. I think this paired with the skills training, it's like a booster. The skills training can improve you a lot, but it can only get you so far, right? And
Right.
it's just how to multiply the impact of everything that you're doing on the court. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
you're doing awesome stuff. I
Thanks,
appreciate you
man.
coming on and sharing your knowledge.
Thanks for having me.